first time, unmute. So thank you for joining us. We're excited. This is our first webinar. Unfortunate circumstances that have brought us into using this technology, but I think I choose to see it as a blessing. So I'm gonna stop my video so you don't have to watch me speak the whole time, but very excited to share with you what's been a very successful series for us with webinars so far, and really challenge you to take some notes and be as involved as you can. You can chat, and Alani's going to be monitoring that, and we're going to just jump in and get started. So what are new truths? What is the whole purpose? Why is Lawson Associates doing this webinar series? And really, there's no trick. It's just part of our 2030 vision that we've created for our company, and we've created this big and a scary goal for ourselves and said, what is our purpose and what are we trying to accomplish? And I share this with you because I believe it ties into what I'm going to talk about today with our safety management systems and really looking at how our systems are operating. And so we've spent a lot of time putting this together to say, what are we here? What do we exist for? What is success to us? And really, we want to be able to impact our community, our state, and make Hawaii safer. And we think by doing so, we can also make Hawaii more prosperous. I don't think you have to choose between safety and production and efficiency. So with starting this new webinar series today, I wanted to just let some of you know who may be working from home. We do have some other webinars that we've set up for this month. Our Competent Person series, we're going to be doing from a meeting room where all the participants will actually be able to see each other and interact with one another, so we can perform our, I won't call it hands-on, but our interactive portions of the course, and I can see you and we can all discuss and talk. And then we have another free webinar coming up on April 29th, being a safety professional, and that just talks about what are the different options we have, what are some of the things we can do as professionals to become a safety professional, but also to increase our knowledge and our value to our organization. So we hope that you'll consider joining us for those. Also, if you haven't done so already, if you go to our website real quick, and you can click just to join our e-club so you can stay in touch, get some tips, our updates on our trainings, and changes to regulations, and so on and so forth. We'll be hopefully starting a video blog and a blog pretty soon, and I think we're trying to add value in different ways. So let's start off. I want to tell you a story. So this is Emalani Foley, and she works with Ahakane. They are a group that teaches Hawaiian medicinal techniques called La'au Lapa'au. And I had actually gone to her class this day. I took a picture of her and her student, and it was striking for me because the statement on the board said that there are those of us who are in need of some new truths. And I was like, whoa. And I immediately thought about what the safety field and what we do and trying to change people's behaviors and thought processes and really help our companies be more efficient and effective and take care of our workers. And that really resonated with me. So I started thinking about how that applies to our training. And when people come into training, we all have various levels of experience, opinions. And really, this first slide is just to kind of pause us for a second before we get rolling and challenge you with, look for new truths. In her class, she was teaching us how to use certain plants instead of going to a medicine cabinet or going to a doctor, because we all grow up a certain way. We all have certain experiences, and as children, we're taught a certain thing, we take that as truth and we move forward, and that becomes true to us. And so without thinking, if I have a headache, I'll go to the medicine cabinet, I'll grab a Tylenol, I'll take the Tylenol, and I'll move on. And I expect that that will work because in the past that's worked. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way or even the right way. I've been doing it for 50 years. Maybe there's a different way I should be doing it now as technology and medicine and everything changes. And maybe the ways of the past were actually better than what we've gotten to from here. And so it really just caused me to stop for a second, put aside my already established opinions or practices, and listen for some new information that might change how I currently view my decision-making process when I have a headache. So I thought that's perfect for safety and when we do our training. And We talk about this now at the beginning of all of our classes, really saying, you know, take a moment and really work and try and, we've heard this term all the time, think outside of the box. That's really where we find new truths. And the benefit here is that we push aside what we think we already know or believe, and we look with a new perspective. You know, another way to say this is to look to disprove what you think you know. This way we'll listen for new information instead of only hearing what we already prove what we know. Like, oh yeah, I knew that already. Yep, that's what I think. Instead of missing the 4 other points that may have changed what your perspective is. So I challenge you to do that here for the next 2 hours with me. So one of the things that we did when we put together our vision is we really sat down and we thought, what is our process? What are we trying to communicate? And we're really trying to think smart, be efficient, be profitable. I said this earlier, we don't have to choose between working safely and making money. To be honest, we make money when we do the job the right way the first time. And that's efficiency. And efficiency to me absolutely includes safety. Okay? Doesn't mean we don't care about people. 1,000,000%, that is the basis. But if that's all it took, we wouldn't have such struggles to change behaviors or to get people to understand the value and the importance of some of the safety processes that we have. So we created and copywrote this safety intelligence system that we have here. And so if you really think about it, many of us have heard of the term intelligence quotient or IQ. And this is really a degree or amount of intelligence that a person's said to have. And I've heard and read that people say, well, you're born with a certain capacity. You still have to develop to reach that intelligence capacity. But most people, you just really can't go beyond what you're born with, okay? And many of us have heard of emotional intelligence or the emotional quotient, EQ. It's a great book if you haven't read it and taken the test. It's pretty interesting, but that's really a measurement of our capacity to be aware of or control or express our emotions and how we handle our interpersonal relationships, whether we're empathetic and we can adjust ourselves to others, okay? So now we have our safety quotient, our safety intelligence. And that's really our capacity to be aware of, to control, or to express our commitment, our understanding of safety and the impact on human capital, sustainability, efficiency, and profitability. And I'm going to talk more about this human capital sustainability because it's a big part of what is driving our processes. So this safety intelligence is really then the process of integrating a safety management system. You're going to hear me use that term all day today. Really pivoting away from safety programs to safety management systems. And there's a difference between the two that we'll keep discussing. But we want to integrate our management system into the workflow of an organization, into the culture, into the organization's goals, and our focus is on this human capital sustainability. So what is human capital sustainability then? So it's defined as an intangible collective resource possessed by individuals and groups within a given population. And so these resources could include things like their knowledge. We talk about this when we talk about an aging workforce, what knowledge and intellectual property we lose when we lose that group within our teams, right? It's their talents, their skills, their abilities, their experience, their intelligence, the training that we've input and developed within them, their skills, abilities, experience, intelligence. Sorry, I said that already. It's the cumulative total of all these things that give our organizations wealth from the people that drive our businesses, right? National Safety Council recognized this many years ago, and when we started talking about how, wow, this new millennium that we've entered into is really a huge change in our industries and how we do business. We've become a more global society. We're not just competing with the business next door. We may be competing with the business in another state, in another country, okay? We've got new regulations and legislations and best practices. So all these things have made it difficult for companies to stay competitive. So it's become even more critical for company executives to take stock in our human capital sustainability, our resources, to find our edge. So outsourcing and subcontracting, these have been ways that businesses have moved towards solutions for this. But it has been very, very clear that the greatest resource an organization has is our workforce. And so obviously safety is a very important piece of that sustainability factor. You know, we hear a lot about environmental sustainability. I think that's very important. We have our, saving and sustaining of our arts and our religion and our beliefs, but we also have to have a well-balanced system that sustains our people as well. And, we're choosing to really focus on that human piece. So I'd like to share a case study between 3 different individuals with you and compare what they have in common in relation to one another and safety intelligence, and trying to help kind of lead some examples, real life examples of what we're talking about today. So what do we have in common with Henry Ford? And let's just talk about him a little bit. I think we all know, Ford automobiles, the assembly line, but let's dig in a little bit deeper and understand how he became the icon that he is today. So when he began making cars, this was back in the early 1900s, state of the art at that time in manufacturing meant that the car bodies were delivered by horse-drawn carriage. They had teams of workers who assembled these automobiles on top of sawhorses, and the teams would actually rotate from one station to another to do their part to bring the vehicle together. Parts deliveries were timed, but they ran late a lot of times because now we have a pileup of workers. If one worker didn't finish, the next crew came over, and they were working basically one on top of another. I think we can relate to this sometimes in construction, just trying to get space and trying to not have delays in production. This really resulted in chaos and archaic practices. And these practices actually came to an end around 1913, when people started to say, somebody needs to invent a way to produce these cars in quantity, this mass production concept. And people were saying that whoever can do this successfully and produce a car that's sufficient mechanically, whose price is within reach of millions of people who right now can't afford a car, will be rich, but they'll also be considered a huge public benefactor. And to me, I think that's huge. So in 1908, Ford had already created this Model T, which was called the car for the masses. And he was trying to find a way to make many of these cars, as many of them at a rapid pace and high quality as he possibly could. So here's the key. What did he do? How did he accomplish this? Many people may not know this and think that Ford just came up with this assembly line process on his own. He didn't. He surrounded himself with experts from different fields, and this is interesting. None of these people were automobile makers. He had people from the brewing industry, the canning and steelmaking industries, and each of these experts contributed to a solution for mass auto manufacturing. So his vision and his leadership enabled him to create a climate, a learning team, if you would, where they could collaborate, bring new ideas, and really push forward innovation. I'm sure he got a lot of comments of, nobody does it that way, we always do it this way. But his ability to innovate and lead and see forward was huge in developing a moving assembly line. So interestingly, they used to move their crews from station to station. They actually came up with a new process where they had a winch and a rope stretched across the floor. They had 140 assemblers stationed across a 150-foot line, and they installed parts on the chassis as the chassis was dragged across the floor. This innovation, man hours of final assembly, when they put this in place, dropped from more than 12 hours under a stationary system to fewer than 3. That's huge if you could think about that, okay? So in 1914, the rope was then replaced with a chain, and it kept getting better and better and better. So this is key. By 1912, Ford Motor Company was producing 82,000 Model Ts with the old process where a car was $600, which at the time that was out of reach. By 1916, production was at 585,000 and the price was $360. That's substantial. Okay, so this large scale production wasn't just focused on production. One of the most amazing parts of this is that it was also safer and absolutely more efficient for everybody. And so by surrounding himself with these experts from different fields, he created these learning teams, he had vision, and this enabled him to create a climate where they could collaborate and put new innovations into place. So we talk about Ford and safety intelligence. You know, really he used third-party experts. So I challenge you that just because somebody doesn't do your trade or doesn't do your business doesn't mean the way they do something can't add value. I think quite often we look at other businesses and how they're doing project management or how they're communicating or how they're collaborating in their workspaces with their teams and say, wow, that works really well. Could that work for us? And that's what we're really trying to challenge you with. They were innovative in a systems-based solution, not in a vacuum or in a silo. And so they created a climate where they could say how one piece affected another and create the whole moving assembly line, not just focusing on one piece individually at a time. They looked at the whole process. Okay? And of course, from this was that a massive improved efficiency. So really, we're talking about safety management and how it can be a competitive advantage or edge for us in our business arena. And I just want to say, absolutely, safety is about people. We already started off talking about human capital sustainability and the intangible value that that presents to an organization. Okay? But there's other things that safety brings value for. And honestly, I think my lifelong goal and ambition is to, when I die, hopefully a long time from now, but is that people will look back and say that safety really became a tool and a value instead of this negative hammer or punishment that people felt that it held them back and they had to choose between doing something in compliance so they wouldn't get hurt versus getting a job done quick so they could make money and stay in business. I don't feel you have to choose between those. So really looking at ways to how do we change that perception? And part of that was coming back and saying the realization that maybe how we're trying to implement and manage these programs is where the change needs to begin, right? We always look outwardly and say what somebody else has to do different. So this really comes from reflecting inwardly and saying, how do we do our processes? And what other information exists out there that would help us pivot and change our perspective, the way we see things and the way we do things, okay? So the safety management systems really take and integrate risk control, loss reduction, all these efforts to proactively put these into our businesses. This comes from management leadership and commitment, meaningful employee involvement, and effective measurement systems, and continuous improvement, okay? So we're never done with safety management. That's the other piece, you know. In many of our businesses, we get a product, we create it, we sell it. We get a project, we build it, we sell it, we move on. But safety management systems are interacting and moving, they're dynamic, and they interface with every element of an organization, not just the production piece. So we really challenge you to consider not only whether you've the elements required by a safety management system, and we really gravitated towards the ANSI Z10. We've been using this standard for years, but I think within the last, I'm going to say 3 to 5 years, we have really stepped back and said, are we really implementing this system the way it was intended? And what are some of the new developments and thought processes with how those elements interact with all the other aspects of the system instead of doing this in a vacuum? You know, systems are dynamic. They are not linear. Everything doesn't go automatically in order and only affect the step next to it. It affects everything. And so changes in one area affect another. And they're either positive changes, which is hopefully what we desire, or negative changes, which are undesired, which could be something like an injury. Okay. So the next case study person that I want to look at is Paul O'Neill. And some of you may have read about Paul O'Neill. I show you this excerpt. You can actually go online, and Smart Safety has gotten permission from Charles Duhigg, who's the author of this book, That Power Habit. Great book, by the way, if you like to read or listen to audiobooks in your car. But one whole chapter is devoted to Paul O'Neill, who was the CEO for Alcoa. And he actually achieved massive success with this business by focusing on safety. So he, at the time he took over for Alcoa, they were failing, and they're a huge aluminum manufacturing company all over the world. He was really not this superstar, flashy, typical CEO that you would expect. He was actually a former government bureaucrat. Many on Wall Street had never even heard of him. And when he was introduced at the press conference, he started off talking about safety and his intentions to make Alcoa the safest company in America. And he was going to go for 0 injuries. The press in the room, the investors and stockholders, honestly, they said they thought he was on drugs, some weird hippie, and was this the right room they were supposed to be in to be introduced to the new CEO of this huge international organization. So whenever O'Neill was asked about how Alcoa was doing, he immediately and consistently redirected to focus on the safety process as the key indicator as to whether they're making progress in changing habits. And so this effort required collaboration from management and the line worker, which was not occurring before. There was a huge gap and barrier there, which I think is common in many industries and companies, but this is the key to success of the goal, was for those two groups to work together, right? So within a year of this introductory press conference and him announcing, hey, we're gonna focus on safety, Alcoa's profits hit a record high. By the time he retired in 2000, the company's annual net income was 5 times larger than before he arrived, and its market capitalization had risen to 27 billion, or by 27 billion. All that growth that occurred while he was CEO, at the same time of the financial improvements, Alcoa became one of the safest companies in the world. Okay, and again, they focused this by focusing on one keystone habit. So before he had arrived, almost every Alcoa plant had at least 1 accident per week. That's massive. Since his safety plan was implemented, some facilities would go years without a single employee losing a workday due to an accident. In fact, their worker injury rate fell to 1/20th of the US average. Okay. So he made one of the world's largest, Alcoa, the largest, stodgiest, stuck in their way and potentially dangerous companies into a profit machine focusing on safety. And that really is attacking one habit and watching those changes then ripple throughout the organization into other areas. And really what he said was that you can't order people to change. I mean, you can. You'll get change for about 2 seconds if you're lucky. And when you walk away, it's going to go back and get even worse, okay? I've learned that much in my career. That's not how our brain works. So he decided he was going to start focusing on one thing, and if he could disrupt the habits around one thing, it would spread through the company. And he believed that safety was necessary, it was a real problem at Alcoa, and he had to take care of his human capital. So he also believed and knew that some habits have more power to start a chain reaction to change than others. So the change becomes contagious, so to say. So some habits matter more than others. Safety certainly, I would argue, is one of those, and obviously through Mr. O'Neill's results here, right? But they can remake a business and impact people's lives in a really positive way. And so that influences how people work, how they eat, play, spend, and communicate, basically how they think and live. So our next and third case study is Dr. Betty Jenkins, Auntie Betty. She's the daughter of Elizabeth Ellis. Many of you She was a principal. You may or may not have heard of her. She was an educator and a native Hawaiian speaker. She's actually credited with being the teacher for today's leading Hawaiian language professors. Dr. Jenkins is a revered elder, or kupuna. She's a lifetime educator, a Hawaiian innovator, a cultural practitioner. She's also the mother of Nalani Jenkins, who introduced us, our CEO. And Nalani is also a legendary Hawaiian musician and songwriter for Naleo Pilimehana. So great legacy within their family. A lot of this is based on Dr. Jenkins' 4 Bs. She developed this process as a teacher. She later took this concept to adults in rehabilitation programs, other cultural groups and communities, and spread it across many different genres. But her 4 Bs really started off by unifying her students, giving them a sense of belonging and value in their beliefs within her classroom. And while this culture really, in this example, was based on Hawaiian values, it can span across the workplace and be infused into the safety culture, which focuses on unity of effort, value of life, a sense of belonging to a team, and the thoughts and behaviors that can contribute to achieving goals in a positive way. So these 4 Bs have fostered and uplifted the value of individuals, the community, all these things to work together to improve quality of life, which is what we try and achieve in a safety management system. By the way, these 4 Bs are the basis, and human capital sustainability are the basis of a new nonprofit that we're supporting called Be Hawaii, BE Hawaii. And it's based on Dr. Jenkins' 4 Bs. And we're excited about that. So hopefully you'll see some things coming out about that nonprofit here in the next few months as they form and start to do things with Lawson to help support outreaches, workforce development, training, and other opportunities. So we're excited about that. So this case study, what's the connection to safety intelligence? What do these 3 people have in common with all this process? And hopefully you've been connecting the dots along the way. But all of these people, they were successful in their own different industries, yet many of them share the same concepts that help them achieve their success, which are the same concepts that safety intelligence is built on and safety management systems are built on. So Dr. Jenkins, she had culture, or the way we do things, or their beliefs, right? She had a process for learning. Her beliefs were based on values and unity of effort of a team and belonging. Dr. Henry Ford had a culture within his organization, the way we do things here, not influenced negatively by outside, but taking information inside and creating the way we do our business. They had processes that they put together that created learning teams that allowed them to be innovative. They had unity of effort with their groups. They achieved efficiency, and again, they used third-party experts. And then Paul O'Neill definitely created a culture, the way they do their business, their keystone habits, processes for their safety procedures, and the concept of working together and unity of effort spread across the board to help them achieve efficiency in all areas of their system, not just safety. They had team involvement, accountability, and so these are all good examples of success in different ways that are very similar to the things that we're looking for when we talk about safety intelligence and safety management systems. So certainly anything worth doing takes effort. So transitioning certainly from a traditional safety program, which may use some of the same elements, but not be implemented in the same way. It takes vision, it takes commitment, and it takes being open to new ways of thinking or new truths. So it's interesting in a lot of my research and kind of thinking about these things and, trying to do things in a different way. I really came across that there's a common assumption that if an organization implements all the pieces or policies or programs that they're supposed to in isolation from one another, First, I'm going to do my respiratory program. Then I have my training program. Then I have fall protection. You get the idea, right? As long as I implement each piece in isolation from one another, as long as I have all of them, I'll have a coherent management system because I have all the pieces. But we haven't considered interaction, interdependency, the dynamics of that system and how they relate to one another. And as a result, while we may have all the pieces in place, they're not producing high leverage outcomes. They're just quote unquote compliant. So instead, we then come and we're frustrated because we have a collection of all these isolated programs. It could be initiatives for certain trends. It could be best practices. They are potentially functioning in conflict with one another, wasting resources and minimizing positive and desired consequences because we haven't considered them as a system and in relation to one another. We've looked at them in isolation or in a silo. Think about, you may have a well-functioning program in place right now. In fact, I look at the list of attendees and I see many companies that have good safety programs. But think for a second how much better it could be if all these programs were actually interconnected and involved all the other parts of your business. I'll give an example. I had run a safety program for a large contractor for a while, and we had drug testing. It was pre-employment, post-offer drug testing. It was required to work in the company. But consistently, we were having people start work, not get drug tested, and then we had problems that resulted from that, okay? So just as an example, we looked at that and we said, how is this happening? How can people even get hired and get paid, and we don't even know that they've had their drug test? So we actually went back and said, what is this hiring process? How does this work? And talked to the different jobs and said, what are the different pieces? And then went and talked to accounting and how do they interface here, and talked to HR and project management, and actually came back and changed the process where different people were involved. And it was almost virtually impossible for you to be able to hire somebody, not have a drug test, and even get their payroll processed. Okay? So that's just an example of system thinking of not just in isolation here, you got to be drug tested, then you can go to work, but not looking at the process and the interaction with all the other organizational elements that are they're key and critical that it interfaces with. So this change process, this systems approach. So this is a significant change for organizations, and lacking systems thinking, individuals and groups can really oversimplify what we call linear or cause and effect mental models. And mental models are really the perception of the way we always do things in our mind that we stick to. It's almost what I tried to ask you to put aside when we talked about new truths, okay? So these mental models, they don't accurately reflect the system dynamics and organizational work complexity. So some examples of these efforts and assumptions that lack systems thinking could be improving an accident investigation form to improve investigations, okay? Training staff to just improve quality of products without understanding the system that's driving those quality issues. Okay? Changing a procedure to make a job safer, but not looking at the entire process and the interaction of all the pieces that made it unsafe to begin with. Modifying a performance measure to improve performance, instead of looking at how the work's being performed, what are the issues, and how are the interactions within the system. So each of these are well-intended for sure, and they're based on this linear causation model. So solutions seem obvious because we're looking at the problem in a vacuum. We're looking at it isolated from other system elements and feedback from the people working within the system. This is called a feedback loop. So systems, the adaptation of these systems aren't considered, the feedback isn't understood or defined. And this looks like things like saying and asking yourself, hey, I'm going to change this process. How does this change impact other areas? Who else does this change affect? What processes are impacted and how? What are the potential long-term effects? Does this change improve or hinder relationships of this system and how they work together? And does this change produce short-term benefits at the expense of long-term gain? So it's really crucial that organizations who are looking to implement the standard safety management system or occupational health and safety management system first understand what is your existing organic management system, not what it's supposed to be or what you say it is on paper, but what are you really doing? I hear this in the field sometimes. Many of you can probably relate to this. Well, I know it's what the policy says, but this is actually how we do it. And so that really involves understanding how work is completed at all levels and stepping back. And I don't know if any of you have watched that show Undercover Boss before, but I think about this every time I think about this part of our processes. But it's really going in to observe and shadow and learn and understand each function within the organization, within each department, and how they work, not to go in and inspect and point out all the safety issues, but to understand the process so we can actually understand proper system changes, not just isolated linear changes, okay? So really important to look at predicting the possible effects of this change. So it's important to also identify desired consequences for a system and understand the current state. We talked about this gaps. You could call it doing a gap analysis to learn these organizational processes. And we really are trying to define what is our system and what positive consequences will provide a successful system for our organization. So in other words, what does success look like for us? What are the intended results? What will be measured to determine success? How will the organization recognize it's been successful? Why is it important to the organization, and where will this provide the most benefit? And you know, this really isn't something for one person to do. This is really something for a learning team and a group to put together, key stakeholders, people who understand all the different processes and coming together and buying in and creating this. These should be key influencers within your organization, which may be formal or informal leaders, right? But we really want to define to our key group for the organization, what does success look like? And you know, this takes a degree of safety maturity also. So I also challenge you on a daily basis, instead of just investigating near misses and incidents, which we need to do, we need to learn from and capture from, but what's working well and why is it working well? And let's go figure that out and then try and take that and see how we can replicate that, and where are those elements missing in the other parts of our business and in our system, okay? So failure to include safety considerations in our standard work planning and create a balance with that can result in unexpected and undesired disruption of our value stream, which is our work, our time, our money, our profit, our process, okay? And that's just as big as an impact, if not more, than poor quality issues. I've experienced this on several occasions where I've gone to, for a construction client, I've gone to a pre-activity meeting, and we sit down and the management team presents us with the work plan, and then the safety person or professional presents us with the hazard analysis. And the steps in the hazard analysis do not match the steps in the work plan. And I asked the safety professional, did you talk with the team before you created this? Sometimes they say yes, and sometimes they say no. And then I say, well, how can it be then that your steps are not the same as the steps in this work plan? That's a blaringly obvious example of siloed operations, right? Or the work team, the supervisory team, creates the hazard analysis, and it's clear it has very limited interface with safety because of the things that are missing or the things that are listed there, and it's lacking, you know, an overall perspective of what's impacted. So just some examples of this, okay? So let's talk about then, you know, if this is a maturity issue, which is a barrier to our ability to put these things in place. Here's just a couple different examples. This comes from an article in the November 2019 safety leadership article. This was written by Don Martin and Don Grover, and they were talking about, could focusing on serious incidents or fatalities, the reduction in these be a mistake, right? Could focusing on serious incident or fatalities only Could this be a mistake? And so they said that these safety maturity barriers were problems when we only focus on these serious incident or fatalities. Okay. So the first is low functioning safety governance. So this is where our leaders' role in safety was passive and didn't provide clear direction. We're going to talk about this more in a minute, but the most fundamental aspect of any of these safety management systems, safety programs, whatever you want to call it, if management leadership and commitment is not involved, then that's not just cheerleading and saying, yes, this is what we believe in, but actually participating and actually being a leader. If that's not there, you know, you're going to have a ceiling put on over you that you won't be able to overcome without that being removed. Okay. So the next one is low senior leadership accountability, and accountability is answerability. That could be positive, that could be consequential. Okay. Senior leaders in these safety maturity barrier situations deflected acceptance of accountability, and they would talk about, well, that's the site level person's responsibility, or the site level leader would blame it on the employee as being primarily accountable. That's an immediate sign that there's problems. Okay. Looking at leadership accountability, saying this is my program, what do I need to change, what wasn't in place because of a result of my actions, and going down the line to make changes is very important. Poor monitoring and follow through for key initiatives. So if people don't have clear direction from the top, then safety staff steps in, maybe they issue a procedure in a vacuum without having even understanding, knowledge, buy-in. Maybe they have no interest from top management. It could be a variety of issues. We're doing the best we can. We try and put something in place in a vacuum, but then there's no support or requirement to create the implementation of this plan, or to follow through with making sure that we're doing what we said we would do. And then there's no systemic approach to controlling exposure. So focus is chasing injury, or we call that putting out fires, and chasing injury prevention rather than identifying and controlling exposures through prevention, through pre-planning processes that include everyone, right? Not just safety staff looking at it and trying their best to identify what they think the issue is. And then misaligned priorities. This is where safety, we say it's number one, it's written all over the place. We say the words all the time, but our actions don't match the words, especially if there's a conflict between production and safety. And really the fact that there's a conflict between production and safety goes back to the very beginning of proper involvement and proper management leadership and support. So if you say it's number one, then we walk those out, and what does that look like? And what are we going to do if we're faced with this schedule issue or cost issue, but we have a serious safety deficiency in our processes or our system? So that's where, you know, feedback in the field is that, yeah, we know you guys say the safety stuff, but if the soup or the foreman or the supervisor or the manager comes out here and we're behind schedule, then that means get it done, right? It means get it done. So the attributes of a successful safety management system are the same as successful business functions. That's the cool part, okay? And we, as an organization, it will be very difficult to reach high leverage performance, even if you put effort into changing behaviors of the system over time, if we don't understand how the system's working. So the undesired system that we then have in place reinforces itself, and it becomes naturally this mental model of the way we've always done things. I won't tell this story today, but I have this roast beef story about, you know, a recipe that gets handed down from generations to generations that causes waste of the meat. And when it's finally looked at, it's because how the person was taught how to make something using a family tradition pan that meat today doesn't fit in. So it's kind of almost like, well, this is the way we've always done it. We can't change it because this is our process. And the question has to be why. There's so many things that we advance within technology. I use this example all the time. Almost everybody has a smartphone. There's a few holdouts on flip phones out there, but almost everybody has a smartphone. So you're willing to change and innovate and learn new behaviors that are of benefit to you from the use of that smartphone, why can't we take that same concept and present our systems and how we integrate our safety program into our organization with the same concept of innovations and benefits for everybody, not just benefits for safety in a vacuum, that actually can create this change in perception and this pivot in our organizations. So these mental models of like the way we've always done things and these assumptions behind those are really low leverage performance. And even though they're well-intentioned, these misplaced efforts continue to produce undesired consequences. And that's where we continue to build this barrier and conflict between safety and productivity, because we haven't married the two together and looked at how the two interface with one another in a dynamic systems thinking way. We're looking at them linear. We're looking at them based on old mental models or beliefs, and we're resisting them, the change and innovation, because it's scary, it's different, it's uncomfortable, but it's necessary for us to move beyond these failures within our system or these low leverage performances from them. So supervisors, we talked about the single most important characteristic of safety excellence is management, leadership, and commitment. So if management's knowledgeable, involved, accountable, and communicating a positive, proactive safety management system as the expectation, then everyone else will as well. And the reverse is true. If management is not knowledgeable, involved, accountable, and communicating in a positive, proactive way, and using and working within the safety management system, right? No one else will either. And that's where we start this cat and mouse putting out fires process. So what are some of the things that management leadership can do, or some key concepts for success? If you're a supervisor, we want to communicate to them, we need to talk about, what does success look like? Where have we seen success in other areas of our business? What characteristics go with that? It could be even characteristics from other types of work. And how can we apply that to our safety? And so the first thing is that we have a vision. I shared with you our vision at the beginning of the program. This is what we want to accomplish from all of our efforts and why we come to work every day, right? What is your vision for your program or your safety management system? We were with a client the other day and we had 16 supervisors in the room. And the first thing that we did was we said, okay, we talked about what a vision is. And we talked about, why are we even here? What are we trying to accomplish? And how important their involvement was. But then we had them think for a little bit. We went around the room and we just said, describe what a safe job site looks like to you. And I was so impressed with the answers that I got, just going around the room and how they built on one another and were really positive things, and things that everybody agreed. This is the direction and this is the vision that we're creating for ourselves, so we know what success looks like. That's really important. Okay. Think systems. We can't think linear. Everything has an interaction and a dynamic impact on other areas of our business. And so we have to understand our business and really learn and shift to a systems thinking process. Integrate safety, and that's that integrating safety and health into the business through this systems thinking, through a safety management system. And I mean no offense to anybody whose logo is safety first, but I'm talking about the concept of this for a second. I've always had kind of a lack of appreciation for this logo, safety first. Now, obviously, I'm a safety professional. I've dedicated 30 plus years of my life to trying to help businesses be more effective and take care of our workforce. But if we say safety first, we're reinforcing this isolation factor. Safety first, go do your safety meeting over here. Okay, now we talk about everything else we're going to do that doesn't include safety, our production for the day. That's ridiculous. We should talk about safe production. Our safety should be integrated into the efficiency processes and the way that we do our business. In a rose-colored glass world, we shouldn't even know we're working safely. We should just be doing it because this is the efficient, integrated way that we plan our work. Okay. Define roles and responsibilities. it's amazing if I challenge you to go out and just ask supervision and management within your workplace, you know, as a project manager, what's your role and responsibility within the safety program? And if you're getting things like world peace, zero accidents, you know, so how do you accomplish that? Tell me, what are the things you do that help create zero accidents, right? And, you know, that could be a very important place to understand that there's a lacking of integration within your management system if your managers don't even know their roles and responsibilities. Okay. Require accountability from everybody, not just employees. In fact, I would say if there's issues with employees in the field, we need to work our way backwards to find out what in the system is supporting that behavior and what else in the system needs to change for that employee's behavior to change. It's not just an employee behavioral issue. In most cases, there's someone or something supporting that unsafe behavior. Okay? Allocate resources to support the program and really understand what resources you need. I've said this so many times. If I had a very limited training budget, for example, I would focus on training my management and my supervisors, and they would be the most intelligent, safety trained, understanding of our tools and equipment and processes, because then they're going to plan jobs and communicate expectations and lead the work to be done in that manner that they understand. So often we spend all our time training employees, maybe some foremen, maybe some soups and engineers here and then, and some presidents here and there, which I think is great. But we're pouring all of our resources into a group of employees who then has to work for a supervisor who's not trained to the same level. To be fair, they're put in that position because they're good at what they do. It doesn't necessarily mean they understand all the safety elements. I ran into a superintendent last year who'd been doing this work for 30 years. And despite I didn't believe him at first until we talked for quite a while, he didn't know the specifications to build a guardrail the right way. I couldn't believe it. But after talking to him for quite some time, I saw how his system had supported that throughout his whole career. That wasn't his job or responsibility. He just went out and built it how he thought it should be, which was not correct, okay? So allocate resources, conduct assessments to support changes. What do you want your program and system to look like? And go out and measure and check and see, is that actually what we're doing? And then take proactive measures, right? I love this saying by Dr. Deming, and it says that funny how we don't have time to improve, but we have plenty of time to perform work inefficiently and resolve the same problems over and over and over again. Just think about that for a second. I mean, we don't have time to plan, we don't have time to train, but we have time to go out and pour concrete the wrong way, somebody gets hurt, and now we have to chip it out. And that's our process. That is not efficient, right? So it's really a shift in our thought processes to understand this systems thinking that we want to shift back into a more collaborative, interdependent process between our different working groups. So this has been around for a while. This diagram actually shows linear thinking. If you've seen the newer ANSI Z10 safety management system diagram, it looks like an atom has exploded all over the page, but it's just trying to show that I don't have to plan, do, check, act. Those are the pieces, but they don't have to necessarily go in that order. And what I do may affect my plan versus my plan always affecting what I do. And my check may change my plan. And so they're interactive and interdependent with one another, but this diagram is kind of easier just to look at from that process. So many of you have seen this. I share this all the time. This is the National Safety Council's Foundation for Safety Excellence. And the top portion really represents consequence. And many of us have seen this accident pyramid. There are different ratios we could talk about that go with the top portion. For today's purposes, I'm going to use 363 incidents, where 300 of them were first aid, near miss, or property damage. 60 were recordable. 2 were OSHA, days away, restricted time, and 1 was a fatality. And the scary reality is that we have people walking around there out in the field making decisions based on their own personal experience. There's no way one person, no matter how many jobs you've done, no matter how wonderful you are, There's no way one person can personally validate every requirement within the law that exists, right? I personally validate, oh, using the ladder the right way is important. I've seen somebody fall, so yes, we'll follow that rule now. That type of mentality exists, or it gets skewed to say, well, I'm not going to do that, so I don't need to follow it, or I don't believe in that, so that's not what I'm going to follow. And the reality is that these, we've said this or heard this, that these requirements are put in place for a reason. And really, once we get to a fatality, we know that there have been a lot of other frequencies of elements, and we're increasing in severity. Whether we recognize them or not, they could be all near misses. They could be some minor first aid cases. But if we could take that 300 first aid near miss and property cases and reduce that through our good management system down to 50 or 10, statistically speaking, we should not ever get into a place where we're having a potential for a recordable or a lost time or a fatality, okay? But we, to some degree, we're operating in consequence, okay? Because we're waiting for something to go wrong to validate that we need to change something, whether or not we knew or should have known the requirement was in place, okay? And this is a consequence or a failure-based system, right? It's reactive. What we really want to do is take our safety management system and put it in a proactive method that supports getting up any higher up in this, into the consequence portion of the pyramid. And so the base of the pyramid is based on values. And these values are things that are solid, no matter where you come from, no matter what you do. We all agree as members of this organization that we're going to make decisions based on this, and our judgment of how successful we will be is based on these values. And it could be things like, hey, nothing we do is worth getting hurt. Okay, if something's not working, we're going to stop. We're going to regroup, because if we keep pushing, somebody's going to get hurt, and nothing we do is worth getting hurt. Safety is a managed process. Safety is not just the safety manager's job. Really, your safety professional is there. They should be doing a lot more sophisticated management things than they're doing right now, because they're stuck doing the job the supervisor should be doing. Okay, think about that for a second. Our safety managers could be being a lot more effective and adding more value to our systems and our processes and our training and our whole safety management system if they weren't stuck doing the job that the managers are supposed to be doing, okay? The next value is that every injury could and should have been prevented. We have to believe that. I think back to some very regrettable experiences in my career where I've had to tell somebody their family member's not coming home again. And I just thought to myself, man, you know, did we all have the right perspective about, you know, what we were doing, and was this okay? And of course the answer is no, right? Something in the system had to change. And the first thing was our belief that we can prevent all these injuries, and we should, and we must. And if we really started off with that position that says, no, anything else is not acceptable, and we hold that line, we're in a very good place, right? And that safety is also this shared responsibility. This is a managed process. It's a shared responsibility. My goodness, just even think about it like this. How many safety people do you have in your organization versus how many employees you have? It just, everyone, and how we use our safety management professionals really is something I challenge you to rethink, because safety is a shared responsibility. And if the management team doesn't have it and isn't enacting it and walking that out, then how on earth could a safety manager below, whether we say they have that same authority or not, how on earth could they accomplish it? So once we have a good value basis, we put controls in place, and we'll look at some of the 9 elements of the safety management system. And it's really just, it's a constant continuous improvement process. And there's no mistake that the difference between these proactive elements of control and values and the consequence reactive negative elements of this pyramid are all based on a fulcrum or a pivot point of cause. And this is our culture, this is people, this is our management system's failure, right? And so that's the fulcrum point that tips us towards consequence, or tips us and keeps us back at the control and value stage. And I think of a seesaw or a teeter-totter with bunch of kids on one side and a tiny little kid on the other. And that's really, you know, the balance. How strong are we on the proactive side of things to keep ourselves from moving into the consequence phase? So these are some of the, very quickly, the elements of a safety management system. From National Safety Council's perspective, this is based on 3 comprehensive elements, or operational and technical elements around this center safety management system that all support cultural and behavioral elements and administrative and management elements. And the process that works around that and supports that implementation is management, leadership, and commitment, our assessments and baselines, our goals, strategies, and tactics. Oftentimes I'm going to submit to you that we're implementing tactics without having goals and strategies, okay? And then reviewing and adjusting as we go along. Are we doing what we said we do? Is this working? Is it not? How does it affect the system? All back to those questions. So here's just these 9 elements broken down a little bit more in detail. And obviously for the purposes of today, this is just a high-level overview. But when we talk about administrative and management elements of a safety management system, this is the management, leadership, and commitment. As a safety professional, as a manager, what are we doing to equip our leadership to understand the concepts of what we want to accomplish? Okay. What are our communications and system documentation? I think one of the things I'm super thankful for at Lawson is that I own part of another company that is a communications firm with Milani Jenkins, and it's called 721. And all of our communication strategies are actually strategized with a communications professional that says internally is the message that I'm speaking as a safety professional, because sometimes I don't speak normal English, right? Is what I'm saying translating and being understood internally and externally for our clients, for our own company, for our clients inside of their company and to their clients, and so on and so forth. And really being strategic. Communication words matter, they're important. And we really need to think through how we're presenting what we're trying to say versus message sent versus what message received, right? And then do our actions support those communications too? Then our documentation of our system, we have to support that. We have to have good record-keeping processes, our assessments, our audits, our evaluations, and our continuous improvement process. On our operational and technical side, this is hazard recognition, evaluation, and control. We have to be out there preventing and detecting, looking at design of our facility. There's a lot of information and elements now about BIM and about looking and integrating safety into the design process, which is really great if we get that opportunity. Our engineering elements and our operational safety programs, our technical pieces we have to put in place. And then our cultural and behavioral elements. This is employee involvement, so important. And I think we really give it a whitewash, meaning we just kind of gloss over it. Oh yeah, they're involved because they participate in safety meetings or they get to go to training. No, how are we actually listening to that feedback loop? It may be a whisper, but we need to listen. What is our employee base telling us about this program? What's working, what's not working? And usually what the employees are telling you is that supervision isn't supporting what's needing to be done. And we need to listen to that so that we can go back to our system and figure out how is our system supporting that and how do we change that. So that's motivation, behavior, and attitudes. That's our culture. And then training and orientation. If we only do these pieces in isolation, they will not work. They're all dynamic. They're all interdependent with one another. So if I do training today for an employee, but I haven't trained their supervisor, or I don't actually have management's leadership and commitment that what they learned, and they go out into the field and we want to challenge them and encourage them to take action to implement and follow, but they go out into the field and supervision is like, what are you doing? I'm in charge here. I don't know anything about that, whether they say it or not, and it's shot down. That just ended that. Okay, and that's a message that will be sent, and that's a message that will be received. So let's talk about money. Money, money, money. Yes, this is a safety leadership presentation, and yes, we have to talk about dollars because that is a barrier, and that is an element of what we're coming to work every day is to be profitable so we can stay in business, so we can continue working and producing. So It's not a bad thing, and we want our companies to be successful. Otherwise, something's wrong in our system, you know, but we don't want to sacrifice our human capital for the sake of dollars. And that means if we're doing that, whether it's dollars in the sense of time, dollars in the sense of true hard dollars, or equipment or materials, if we're sacrificing people for those things, something is broken in our system. Okay? So many of you have seen this. It's been around for a very long time. I use it because it's effective. And this is the iceberg theory. And this is just a demonstration of understanding the true costs of, let's say, for example, a worker's injury. We can see the tip of the iceberg. We can measure those down to the penny with loss runs. We can even manipulate them to a certain degree based on our claim management. And you know, some companies are excellent at claims management once a worker's been injured. And that maybe creates a misrepresentation of the effectiveness of the safety program because we're managing after the fact so well. I'm not saying don't manage your claims well. You need to. Once that milk is spilled, you need to clean it up, okay? But the issue is that there are many things that may be hidden because we have such a good claims management system. So we can't judge our effectiveness only on claims and incidence rates. We're missing a huge piece of the picture. So we have our direct costs that we measure, and then our indirect costs. And these aren't as easy to measure, and typically we use ratios to attribute to this. And these could be things like damaged equipment that's not covered by insurance, lost time by the injured worker, fellow workers or supervisors. The accident happens, everybody runs over and responds as they should be, but we're now paying them to respond to an accident instead of paying them to do their production. Again, necessary, but not what the function of the business was intended to be doing. Spoiled products, unhappy customers, that can be, you know, immeasurable cleanup time, scheduled delays, liquidated damages. They say training a new employee takes at least 30 days to replace a new employee. Some of us have been in our organization so long and become so valuable that it could take 2 to 3 people to replace us if something were to happen to us. You have your overhead costs, you have legal fees, and then your increase in insurance costs, right? So really, there's some studies that say for every $1,000 in claims, it's a $4,000 cost in indirect that you add on top of that. And that $4,000 comes out of your pocket. The $1,000 is insurance covered, but nothing's for free in insurance, and that's going to impact your rates as your claims continue. On the right-hand side of the screen, I'm just showing you, I think this is a great program. It's been around for a while. It's OSHA's Safety Pays program, and this really helps. You can go to the website. I gave you the address right there. You can Google it too, but this helps employers assess the impact of their occupational injuries and illnesses on their profitability. Dollars talk, right? So this program uses a company's profit margin. It takes the average cost of an injury or illness and an indirect cost multiplier, and it projects the amount of sales a company would need to cover these costs. So this program is intended as a tool. It can create a report that you can print out from it. You input your own profit rates and profit margins and everything else, but it's intended to raise awareness on how these injuries and illnesses impact profitability. It's not going to give a detailed analysis, but it's based on the National Council on Compensation Insurance. It's based on their data of average costs of lost time for workers' comp claims. And this is really based on 2013 to 2015 data. So you kind of have to take that into account as well. So pretty helpful. This program, this indirect cost estimate that is provided in the program is taken from the Business Roundtable publication on improving construction safety performance. And it's based on a study that was conducted by Stanford University's Department of Civil Engineering. And so the magnitude of indirect costs is inversely related to the seriousness of the injury. And the less serious the injury, the higher the ratio of indirect costs, as you see on the graph there. And while they may account for the majority of true costs of an accident, indirect costs are actually usually uninsured, as I mentioned, and unrecoverable. And so that means it comes out of your bottom line. So these indirect multipliers that you see in Safety Pays schedule here are general estimates based on this limited research. So you just have to understand that. And the indirect cost multiplier can vary depending on an employer's unique circumstances too. So I encourage you to look at that. Another thing that we should be communicating to management and everybody should understand is just the impact of accident costs. So this is a different way to look at the same thing. And let's saying that you had a profit margin of 3%, you had an accident that costs $1,000. I mean, my goodness, nowadays you cut your finger, it gets glued back together, it's $1,000, right? So at a 3% profit margin, that meant you did $33,000 worth of work to pay for that $1,000 accident. $10,000 injury, maybe at a strained shoulder, at 3%, you're doing $333,000 worth of work. $100,000 injury, maybe a back injury, they're much higher than that on average, but $3,333,000 worth of work at 3% to pay for that $100,000 injury. So, you know, the key is waking up supervision to realize it's not just free city with insurance, there's impacts to that, especially if you're self-insured or have a captive type program, but it's going to impact you down the line. And this is money that's going to pay for people who are hurt. That's a consequence. That's not a positive takeaway. And that's money that's taken away from other elements of the business. Could be employee pay, benefits, materials, tools, more workers. And that's not what we want to be spending our money on. There's nothing good that comes from that. So I also like to study things like efficiency. And I came across this, Detnorsky Veritas has an excellent book on disorder or orderliness. And I was researching this when I was looking at housekeeping elements in particular, but this applies across the line. And I took this chart from there and it talks about the cost of wasted time. And so it's how many cents per minute, dollars per hour, daily and annual costs based on 260 work days a year. Okay, and so if we had a worker who had an annual income, non-burden, by the way, of $75,000, if it's burden, you could probably just double that at least. And that means every minute they lose is 60 cents per minute. Every hour they lose is $36.05. The cost of one lost hour daily for a year, $9,300. The cost of one lost minute daily for 30 years, $4,600. And the cost of one lost hour daily for 30 years is $281,000 per worker, okay? You might say, why the heck are you talking about this in a safety leadership class? Because I get told so many times, well, we don't have time to do this training, we don't have time to do this planning, we don't have time for this or that, okay? If you just, I had this happen to me once where I had somebody tell me, we can't stretch. Our company rolled out a stretching program. They said, oh, we're behind schedule. And I said, oh, okay. Well, let me come out and I'll find 15 minutes of free time for you. The stretch is 5 minutes. And if I can't, then I'll tell the company president, you don't need to stretch. But I was sure because I've been out in the field. I've studied the workflow. I observe just like the rest of you guys do. And I know we don't start at 7 when we're supposed to start. And in fact, I also know we don't end at 3:30. We start rolling up at 3 and sometimes earlier. That's wasted time. And so I knew I could find 15 minutes. So I came out the next morning and watched the startup of the job. And at 7:15, I left and I told the supervisor, I found your 15 minutes. You're supposed to start at 7. That guy's still drinking coffee. He's eating manapua, all the way around the line. I said, there you go. If safety is always the first target to be cut back, if we are so pressed on time that we can't train, we can't plan, we can't have an efficient huddle before we start the day, then we certainly can't afford to be sitting around and not starting on time. Okay, and there's all different processes throughout the workday. So challenge your thought process on what is it you're investing your time in, and where can you redistribute that time that can be more effective. For example, safety planning and checks and balances and training, okay? So I was reading this quality progress journal and it said that the sum of waste from materials, people's time, and lost sales often amounts to as much as 20 to 50% of net sales. So if you're a company that does $100 million worth of business, the waste can be 20 to $50 million. I said, my goodness, people's time and our resources, Again, safety is usually the first thing that's the target because it's inconvenient, because we're looking at it from a really a skewed perspective based on our own individual experience, which has probably not been extremely effective or efficient, right? So how can we make the process better versus just cutting it out? And really, systems thinking, to me, and these safety management systems is the answer. Okay, shifting our thought process of how we use and think about safety. So, are you sure the law is in agreement with the way you see things? So we all see the world from our own perspective. That's certainly for sure, right? Through our own eyes and our own experiences. But the question is, what is that perspective based on? Is it fact, or just our own experience, or gossip, or assumption, or is it based on value? So somebody gave me this slide the other day, and I was like, hey, what are you trying to say? But basically, you know, we have what we know. We have the sliver of the pie that represents what you know you don't know. I think those two are reversed, but anyway. And then there's the reality of what you don't know you don't know. Think about that for a minute, right? So we're going to look at a few key regulations from HIOSH. I think these are super important to go through. We review these with new clients all the time. If you haven't read these recently, it's really a well-written document, even though last time it was significantly changed is in 1988, which is a great year, by the way. But, you know, let's look at these key regulations. And I'm going to look at the construction regulation. For my general industry participants, I want to assure you the general industry regulation, general requirements for HIOSH is exactly the same. Okay, so theirs is the 12-60 standard. This is the 12-110. So really look at what this says. So first it's talking about safety and health programs, that this applies to all employers and employees doing business in our state. But listen to what it says. It says every employer shall. That means we must. When it says should, it means you must, with very limited exception and ability for you to show it, okay? But every employer shall comply with state laws and standards regarding a safe place of employment and practices, and shall do everything reasonable and necessary to protect the life, safety, and health of the employees. That's how the law views us and our actions. And if our supervisors and our management don't understand this, that this is what the bar is set at, everything reasonable and necessary, are we doing that? If not, why and where in our system can we go back and reevaluate and insert this into our vision and our expectations? There's two places in the standard here that talks about work practices and how we are to affect these safe workplaces and practices. I'm going to submit to you that this is what in the safety profession we call the hierarchy of controls. It's in the law twice. So really what mitigation methods we put in place to abate risk isn't up to us and what we think we like or what we've seen other people doing. We're really supposed to be evaluating it against this hierarchy of controls. And so you can kind of see along here, it talks about elimination, modification, you have engineering or administrative controls, and it says when this mitigation is feasible, you should put it in place expeditiously, immediately, right away. With PPE required until an accepted reduction of the hazard in the situation is reached. If it's not feasible to eliminate or reduce hazards to acceptable levels, or where hazards continue to exist, then PPE shall be provided and used. PPE is our last option. So how many of us are looking at, well, let's just tie off, or just put a respirator on, or just put on some gloves, instead of looking at, could we eliminate the issue? That's our first choice. You know, can we substitute a chemical for something less, or energy for something lower energy, temperature, etc.? Could we put in place engineering controls, warnings or administrative controls, which in this diagram are procedures and trainings, and that includes rotation of workers in some cases for the safety professionals out there. And then last is PPE. So I had a client ask me, oh, will you help do a fall protection plan for us? We have this roofing work we're going to do on this flat roof. And I came back to them, I looked at the scope, we talked about what they were going to be doing and what their method, mean and method was going to be for the job. And they wanted to just tie off on the roof the whole time, and they'd have workers with rope grabs and ropes and walking all over the place, getting entangled. And I said, really the work you're doing doesn't prohibit you from putting a guardrail system on the parapet edge of this roof, or at least blocking off this area with non-penetrating rails. And they said, well, that's ridiculous. That would take too much time. We don't want to do that. I said, actually, I think your workers would be more efficient. It's safer. And it's actually the proper process that we should be following for the situation. And they insisted no. And so I had to say, well, I don't agree with this. And so I feel like we're not following the hierarchy of controls and putting the best processes in place. So we had a difference of philosophy because of a lack of understanding of what the law actually says in terms of how risk is to be mitigated. It's not just whatever we want. So when we're writing hazard analysis, we're developing work plans and procedures and processes. This is really critical to be thinking about, hey, if we do it this way, could we eliminate the hazard? Should we, make a decision based on why can't we do this? And really pivot how we decide what methods we use and what processes we follow, okay? Under the written safety program criteria, state of Hawaii is one of a handful of states that requires this. There's 12 key elements, and number 3 in this written safety procedure says that we are to provide for visible top management leadership in implementing the program and ensuring that all workers at the site, including contract workers, are provided equally high safety and health so that all will understand that management's commitment is serious. How many of us are focusing on this? What can we do different? Does management understand this? I actually had the president of a company argue with me, and we had to come back 3 or 4 times. He kept approaching us. Would we help him? Would we work with him? And I said, well, who's responsible for your safety program? He said, my safety manager. I said, actually, no, you are. We talk about it. He'd go away, and I'd say, okay, well, call me back after you've thought about this for a while and you understand how important your role is in the program, because I can't help you until you understand that. Okay. And it took 3 or 4 times until he finally came back and said, okay, I get it. Right. You really didn't, but that's okay. But it's important. Management needs to understand their visibility and activity within the program and the key things that they can be doing to support the program. It's so important. It's one of the 3 elements that our programs are to be written to. Another 2 include assigning and communicating responsibilities for all aspects of safety and loss prevention. And there's no mistake in the order of this. It says to managers, to supervisors, and employees. But so often our policy statements and our beliefs and how we divert responsibility down to the employee level, right? It was one of those safety program maturity barriers, is that we do it opposite. We say employees and then a supervisor and then a manager. They need to understand what's expected of them in the implementation of the program. And then the next chapter, so 3 things so far, talking about in our written safety and health programs for the state, that we have to have a system that holds managers, supervisors, and employees accountable for their responsibilities in the program. What are we doing to promote this in a positive way, not in a punitive way, right? How are we recognizing people? How are we encouraging, equipping them, educating them, and motivating them to continue to do this and to take this accountability? Then it talks about that employers shall ensure practices are understood by all employees, that it's through training, positive reinforcement, correction of unsafe performance, and then a clearly defined and communicated disciplinary system. So, this could look at a foreman or a supervisor understanding they have the training, they're giving the training. I won't give safety meetings anymore. I will teach a supervisor or a foreman and stand with them to give the meeting. I really think they should be able to train their crews on how to use a tool or proper adjustment of a harness, right? Because if they can't do that, how on earth are they making sure that that's taking place in the field? Okay. Positive reinforcement is walking around, find people doing things right. I said earlier in the program about let's investigate what works, figure out why that's working, and go out and replicate it. Correcting unsafe performance, silence is consent. I've said this for 30 years. You walk by something, whether you recognize it or not, if you're in leadership, you just validated and said that that was okay. So we need to know what to be looking for and understand how. I have a video I show, it's so old, but I love it. When we teach our fall protection class, it talks about this court case where a guy fell off a roof, and the owner of the project, the general contractor, actually, excuse me, the president of their company and the subcontractor's project manager on site talking, and the general contractor says to the sub, hey, how come you guys are up there not tied off? And he says, oh, you know, we had to man up and get more people, but we don't have enough equipment, but it's on its way. So he says, well, the general says, well, I'm late for a meeting, I'm going to go, but when I get back here, they better not be up on that roof anymore. And then he leaves, and the subcontractor's manager's phone rings, and he walks off, and nobody does anything about it, right? Then it transitions to where they're in court, and the attorney basically has that manager for the general contractor on the stand, and he says, well, I told him to do something about it. I told him it wasn't okay. And she said, well, how long would it have taken you? I know you're late for your meeting, but how long would it have taken you to say, get down from there? And she makes him say it in court, and she times it. She says 4 seconds, right? Could you spare 4 seconds to save this guy from falling off the roof, and now he's paralyzed for the rest of his life? And I challenge you to think about that every time you're about ready to walk by something, you don't want to face what may be potential conflict, or you don't want to have to stop and say something, or whatever the reason would be. I challenge you to think, you know, really, could you spare a few seconds to show where you say the value of your safety program is? And the more supervisors who would actually speak up and start talking about safety and making their own corrections, it would be a tremendous improvement in the field. I can't emphasize that enough, right? It's so important for supervision to do that. I have times where I go out in the field, and if I see something incorrect, we'll talk about it. We'll correct it. I'll ask the supervisor on the side, like, did you not see this? Like, I walked up, I know you saw it, and then you went over to go do something about it. Why wouldn't you have done something on your own, right? Why do I need to come over here and tell you how to do your job? That's crazy, right? To me, that's not a value if I was the owner of your company. If you think about it, our company presidents, whether they know what's in their programs or not, put supervision in place to carry out a piece of their authority in putting that program in place. And so that has to be reinforced by the president and all the way down the line. But nobody signed on to a company, I'm pretty sure, that said, don't enforce our policies. And if they did, you should probably reevaluate your circumstances. But this is really important, that our practices are underscored and understood, okay? Safety and health training. We're actually supposed to have a training program. So A talks about the employer shall develop and institute a safety and health training program. We actually have a free session on how to develop and manage a safety training program, because this requires pre-planning. There's a lot of loss revenue and return on investment from how we're doing our training, how we're planning for our training. I could get off on a tangent here, and I won't. But this is really important to sit back and maybe give yourself a follow-up item to, how is our program being developed? How do we know, what's our needs assessment? How do we know who needs what training? How are we scheduling this? How are we keeping our record keeping so we're not doing repetitive training, or we're validating that the information was understood, and is actually going out and we're checking to make sure that it's being implemented. We're getting return on investment from it. In our other free course on the training programs, we talk about Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve. And I think this is really important, because once you have a learning event, Ebbinghaus studied and found that if you have 5 follow-up touches at different intervals after a learning event, you take what would be maybe a 10% retention and can increase it up to a 90% retention. That's huge value for a strategically planned 5 follow-ups after a training event. So B in the safety and health training, it's funny that 2 out of the 3 paragraphs, so the first one says, hey, all employees have to understand hazards and how to protect themselves. B talks about supervisors and managers have to be trained in the elements of their program and their responsibilities. And C talks about supervisors and managers have to understand their responsibilities and their importance in the program, and they need to be able to recognize hazards, maintain protections, and reinforce training. Okay. And the next one is what we call the rules of construction. And this is where, if you weren't aware of this, it's really important. There is no contractual risk transfer in safety. Your obligation as a prime is a non-delegable duty, okay? And the prime, when you contract for full performance of the contract, you assume all obligations prescribed as employer responsibilities under the law, whether or not you subcontract them. That means when you contract, you have a sub come in to do one piece of work, they're responsible for their own employees, but you as the prime are responsible for your employees and the sub's employees, okay? So very important. This is another key aspect to the state of Hawaii law that's a little bit unique for us. I haven't seen this language anywhere else. I do a lot of expert witnessing, and this is where I testify in court cases, or I'll look at and render an opinion on a case about something, and I see this paragraph come up almost every case I work on. And this is really the expectation that if you do nothing else today, we need to go back and make sure our supervision, from our lead persons to our managers to our supervisors, any level within the company understands this, that the law expects, number one, that an employee shall report hazards to their supervisor promptly. That when that supervisor receives that information, they shall take, it says, immediate steps to correct the unsafe condition or practice. Okay? The time to find out that the law said this isn't in court. It's pretty specific. The definition of immediate is, there's no way around it. It means right now you must do something, whether it's temporary, permanent, whatever, okay? So that's important for us to know as supervisors. Inspections. In 2012, in November 2012, this law changed here in Hawaii, kind of slid under the radar, and we used to have a lot more leniency with this, but as the prime, you're responsible for this. If you're an owner builder, you're responsible to have someone designated to do this for you, but inspections shall be conducted with sufficient frequency and quality, with somebody who can identify, recognize hazards. So if you're not a trained supervisor, I don't know how you're identifying recognized hazards within the law, right? And make sure correction is in order. And it says projects employing 1 to 99 persons at any single moment in the workday have to have an employee assigned to make at least one inspection each day. That's any single moment. And then this rest of this standard that I'm not going to cover goes on to talk about how it must be documented. And it's very specific. Okay? I see a lot of citations for that. I call that low-hanging fruit. Okay. And the last one under this review of some of the key regulations that I think a supervisor should know about today, okay, is the requirements for competence. And I look at this standard as being kind of a across the board, cover all for competent person. And we also have a free 2-hour class on the role of the authorized, competent, qualified person. I personally believe that if we actually implemented competent persons and the training and authorities and the whole process the way it was intended by the law, we would see an immediate drastic impact in the quality of our work in the field. This goes hand in hand with what I just said about supervisors engaging and understanding hazards and taking responsibilities for the safety of their crew the same way they take responsibility for the productivity and quality of their crew. So this says that when work's to be performed under the supervision of a designated person, that person shall have the degree of competence necessary to perform or direct the work in a safe manner. This has come up as well in some cases, and I feel like just because a certain standard doesn't say really clearly this requires competent person supervision, it does right here. This is the general requirement. This is the horizontal standard that reaches across all other rules. And it's really something that management and safety working together, doing a needs assessment for training, doing an assessment for what things are taking place out in the field. What are we going out and looking for? Are we reinforcing behaviors? Are we teaching and coaching our supervisors? How are we helping support the development of their competency? I call it sharpening their eyes, right? So I don't want to see this happen to anybody ever. There was one case here, gosh, it's probably, my clock doesn't work well, but 10 years ago in Waipahu, there was a pretty serious workplace accident where, I'll summarize, and it doesn't matter who the company is, because honestly, I believe all of us are one person's decision away from this. This is actually a very good company, very good safety program. They had a supervisor up on a double roof in the Middle Valley area. They had fall protection estimator plan for it. It was documented. They were replacing an old dilapidated roof on a building. They had horizontal lifeline. They had all they were supposed to have up there. And the worker at the beginning of the day asked the foreman, hey, do I need to tie off? Nobody can see me. Well, if you'd stop for a second and think about what the job entailed, falling through the roof is a real potential, right? So the supervisor later on said he said okay because he didn't want the crew to be mad at him. Well, that's a function of selecting the right person and training and reinforcing, okay? But the worker fell through the roof and was seriously injured. And fortunately, he survived, but he will live with his parents for the rest of their lives and then have to have special care. But this is the first time in my experience in this state of Hawaii that a supervisor was personally sued because of this incident. So the company president was sued, the foreman was sued, and the president's lawsuit got thrown out because of some of the laws that are in place, and the company could also show that they were diligent. This was a isolated event of, the supervisor not following the rules. He was fired immediately, lost his job. He was personally sued. He couldn't afford his own defense, so he had to represent himself. Not only that, just the emotional impact from this incident was, I think we lost 2 people's lives that day, if you think about it, because he was destroyed. And it was very sad. He lost everything. The workers' comp and the company sued, the employees sued him, and the family sued the supervisor because workers' comp would not cover the costs that would be incurred to care for this man. And, so he bore some responsibility, the worker, for asking and not complying with his training. But at the end of the day, the supervisor is where the buck stops. And being able to say no, being able to understand the consequences so you can make a proper decision. Are we equipping our people in the field with enough knowledge of even these general requirements, what we've covered, which isn't everything, to understand how important their decisions are, and that it's not just okay or no big deal or just for a couple minutes or all the other things we hear about. But this is really important that they understand why they're there, who they represent, and what their responsibility is, not just to get the job done, but to get the job done safe production, right? Efficiently and safely. So I would hate to see this ever happen again. Super sad and very unfortunate circumstance all the way around. And just think about that, right? These are some of the things that we're looking and setting back and stepping back and saying, does our leadership know? Have we equipped them properly? Are we set up in a system that supports itself or is working against itself? And, let's go back and evaluate. Let's create some learning teams to look at these processes together. And let's create a plan of action to move forward to get moving back in the right direction. We call this a little bit, it's called practical drift. And it's where we said we wanted to be, what our vision was, what our goals were, whatever it was when you put a safety plan in place. And over time, it drifts to the side. And when we notice, usually it's because something's gone wrong or somebody's got hurt. But we're saying, hey, let's stop now. Let's look at what works, what doesn't work. Let's look at our systems and how they integrate with one another. And let's reset, get out of that practical drift and recognize it and reset back to success. Okay? I love this saying, even if you're on the right track, you're going to get run over if you just sit there. Okay. So, today is a call to action. I challenge you to take the information. Hopefully you've been taking some notes. I challenge you to go do something. I challenge you to go talk to your management team. You can reach out to us. We're happy to share information and material, but we're going to be offering this class again. We'll do this leadership series free for groups of 10 or more people. Why? Because that's part of our vision. Okay, no strings. It's just part of our vision. If it helps you communicate these issues to your management team, even better. I feel like the more people that are headed in the same direction, the easier it makes it for all of us to move in that direction, okay? And to bring others along with us. It's that one keystone habit, right? So we're focusing on that keystone habit, hopefully for our whole state, and saying, let's do something about it. Don't be overwhelmed. Don't be dismayed. Sit back, come up with a strategy. Where do you want to be? How are you going to get there? And start walking it out. Okay. There is no perfect system. Gosh, I've had people tell me this. Actually, Nalani tells me this all the time. Version 1.0 is better than version 9.0. Just do it. Start somewhere. Okay. Here's a really great resource if you belong to the National Safety Council. I love this document. I love this particular year's document for some reason. I just really like how it's written. This is the 2005 version, believe it or not. It's been around a really long time. Great, great, great document, but it's our Code of Ethics resource guide. And interesting that a safety resource guide is called the Code of Ethics, right? There's a reason for that. We're talking about human capital. We're talking about people. And what we say our priorities are, it's ethical, right? And so inside this resource guide, they have 4 essential characteristics of a company. They talk about a code of ethics and how to write a safety policy that really truly communicates the right messages. They give you a step-by-step plan. Obviously, it's not all encompassing, but even if you have a good program, it's a great reset and check and balance. They talk about measuring safety performance, like leading versus lagging indicators. By the way, we're going to have a free 2-hour session on that coming up, leading and lagging indicators and measurements. We can't just measure failure and accidents, right? It has a little gap analysis in there that you can use and other analytical tools. So it's a helpful resource for you if you belong to a National Safety Council. Just one more reminder, we do have some upcoming open enrollment webinars, the confined space, competent person level, scaffolding, fall protection, which is 3 days, 24 hours, and then respirable crystalline silica, which is a half-day class. And then our next free webinar right now is being a safety professional. We're thinking because of some of the downtime, we might come back and add a couple other free webinars in here and there. So watch our website, sign up for our e-club so you'll know if we add some training to those elements. I'm very thankful and appreciative if you want on chat. If you want to ask a couple questions, I have a couple minutes left in order to answer some questions. Somebody asked, can you receive a copy of this presentation? Sure. All you need to do is email me if you'd like. What's that?
Use the info.
Yeah, if you can use info, I-N-F-O, I'll type it in here actually. Nalani will put it on info@lawsonsafety.com. Or it's on there already. And I will get some of the resources that go with this class. I'll email it over to you. I'm happy to do that. Any other questions? How do you get the certificate for participation? Same thing, email info@lawsonsafety with your email and how you want your name spelled, and we will email you back an electronic version of a certificate for attendance. What are the key cultural elements for a successful program? Great question. I'm just going to answer live for everybody if that's okay. When we look at cultural elements of the program, let me come back here. I want to refer back to this document, so forgive me for going backwards in my presentation for a second. Taboo here, but there's so many pieces to this. So our cultural and behavioral elements here in a successful program. First, I think you should start off with doing a cultural assessment. We have an assessment that we do for businesses. You can do it for yourself too, but it's really going out and getting a baseline feel for feedback loops. What are your employees saying about certain pieces of your program, and versus where you think you're at and what you think is going on, and where do they think the successes are and the failures are in a big picture oversight. How are they being involved? How are you motivating and monitoring behaviors? What's your training and orientation programs? And then, in this cultural assessment, you also touch on a little bit of how you have implemented the other 2 elements or key elements of administrative and management and operational and technical elements. I think you start with the baseline. So it's not what you suspect and think, but you're actually going out and touching your feedback loops and listening to what everybody else is saying. And you have to be open to that, okay? From there, I think that you establish an action plan and really sit back and say, do I understand how the business really works? Is my current safety management system in line with those practices? Am I system thinking and involving learning teams so that you have your key influencers speaking and supporting and participating? All those things start to shift cultural elements, but you can't start to change those until you understand where you're currently at. And then the next question was, what's the current HIOSH enforcement activity emphasis? I'm seeing a lot of activity with subcontractor control. I'm seeing a lot of activity with immediate corrective actions. I just call it the low-hanging fruit things. This national emphasis programs like fall protection and trenching are always an issue. I actually don't see a lot of changing trends out there. If anybody else wants to add something to that, you can put it into the webinar chat. But those are the things that we're interfacing with our clients who are experiencing HIOSH inspections. Good questions. Anybody else? Awesome. I love finishing a little bit early. We're available again. You can email us at info@Lawson Safety, and we'll stay on here for a couple more minutes if anybody wants to chat. But thank you very much, everybody, for participating. And I hope that you got good value from this. Thank you. So I'm gonna end it here. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your day.